data, and they found that against this local measure that company spent $34 per voter. Per voter. Wow. There was $1.5 million, is that in this last statewide election we had, I think? And I don't know if the numbers were really big, so I'm losing track of them. But you can imagine that generally that's not sustainable. A company can't spend an industry can't spend $34 per voter with our legislators and elected officials. If you look at our elected officials, very often even our Democrats and progressives who are running on an environmental message get a lot of money from the timber industry, get a lot of money from the chemical industry. And so we see them engaging voters very often in a sympathetic way, but then going back to Salem and refusing to do anything. And so at this point, it does seem very likely that voters will have to take this issue on. It would be great if legislators would do it for us, because they're a lot more capable of writing the kind of nuanced, detailed laws that are really needed for something complex like this. But if they're going to continue to refuse to do it, we'll have to run ballot initiatives. And when you run a ballot initiative, you have to keep it simple. So that means rather than the forestry industry, us and legislators sitting at a table in Salem figuring out rules that maybe make us all a little irritated but get us somewhere better, instead of that we'll go to voters and say, can we ban clear cutting? And because you keep things simple when you put it on a ballot, you're limited in space and ability to communicate with that many people. And so that's kind of, I think, the downside way you can actually kind of see the difference of what the trees are that we're even regrowing and being able to log compared to what was there before. But we're logging these trees on cycles that are shorter than stumps can even rot.
Oh, wow. Oh, so this actually brings me to a good question then. With all the recent forest fires, does this contribute to it? Like lands like this just burn really quickly because it's just all dry?
A small stream like that, more than half of it's actually underground. And so when you reduce that stream flow by 50%, that stream will disappear for the summer once there's a tree farm on this, because those tiny trees are engineered to just grow super fast. You'll see these crazy situations where they have these garters and they'll have the cable going like across the top of that mountain or the top of the other mountain. They'll have a half mile of cable out to drag these trees around.
Do you get your shot?
Yeah, I'm Jason Gonzalez, Forest and Watershed Campaign Organizer with Oregon Wild, here out in the Siletz River watershed. Visiting the Siletz is always a real interesting experience. You know, we're in a river that should be world-class fishing, world-class salmon, world-class steelhead. But what we see out here instead is just about the most egregious example of how Oregon is failing to protect our watersheds. In Oregon, the majority of our streams just are unprotected from clear-cut logging. There's nowhere where that's as visible as it is here in the Siletz River. Here in the Siletz, the other thing that we can see is the complete conversion to tree farming and monocropping. And as we drive through the Siletz, you know, we've got some students out here with us today, young folks who haven't spent a lot of time out in these places, and what they're saying over and over to me is, you know, these trees are all in rows, these trees are all the same size, these trees all look the same. You know, just common sense tells them that that's not good for the river, that's not good for the ecology, it's not good for the wildlife. And we see eroding hillsides where trees are failing. We see steep slopes clear cut over that are eroding straight down into the stream. And it's always really incredible to come out with folks who aren't immersed in this, who see it as a problem so naturally.
Talk to me a little bit about these steep cuts and why they look so gray behind you.
Why they look, what's that?
Why you can see this gray slope and the differences that you can see behind you. There's a new cut, there's the drone actually right there too.
Yeah, so out here in these really steep slope clear-cut lands right over the streams, one of the things that we can see so clearly here is they're gray and dead. There's not really anything growing in them, and that's because that's how the industry wants it. These steep slopes behind us that are directly over salmon-bearing streams have been aerial sprayed by herbicides from helicopters, which means that helicopters have flown over these streams and slopes behind us, spraying chemicals that are designed to kill everything but the one tree the industry wants to let grow, leaving this gray moonscape behind that we see in so much of this watershed. That means there's no shade for the stream, there's no forage for elk or other wildlife, and there's nothing to hold that soil to the hillside to stop it from eroding down into the stream beds and killing salmon eggs. So folks can get more information, get involved with this campaign, learn more about what's going on and how you can help by checking out a few different websites. And there's two that I really want to tell you about today. One of those can be found at www.clearcutoregon.com. The other can be found at www.sprayfreecoast.com. On those websites, you'll find information about Oregon Wild, where I'm working to modernize Oregon's logging laws. You can find information about local community rights groups who are working to protect watersheds from aerial spray and other damaging activities. And you can find people in your area that are working to modernize these laws to protect us all. So here we're looking at the Siletz River and what's called the riparian buffer that's left on the side of it to protect the stream. What we can see is that the Siletz River gets maybe at the most 100 feet of protection. It's probably mostly about 60. This is going to vary by riverside and river size and what kind of fish are in that river. And as we go up to the higher, steeper slopes, you can see that there's really actually no protections for those smaller streams.
So let's talk about that back here in the corner.
Yeah, so when we get up onto these steep slopes, we have completely unprotected streams. We could see these little gullies that flow through with these trenched out valleys that at one point were rivers and streams. Now that these hillsides have been clear cut, those streams have been exposed to the sun, they dry up, and we lose our clean, cool water that we really need for the salmon down in the main stem.
Talk to me about this new cut here and the frequency of cutting.
So on this slope, we've got an active clear cut. We can see the trees have been clear cut from part of it, but there's trees laying down on a lot of the slope that they're still going to be dragging up to put onto trucks. This, unfortunately, is probably the third time this hillside has been logged in the last 2 generations. The next generation of trees that's grown on this hillside, they really might only be allowed to grow for 30 years before they're clear cut again. And those cycles are getting shorter and shorter every year. Years ago, who knows, like you were saying, some fire or something, some landslide, native folks clearing the area for a village, you know, who knows, but they grow real fast when they're in that sun, and then as they get taller and taller, bigger and bigger, you can imagine the work required to grow a ring that wide all the way around compared to the ring, how much wood, you know, these are really narrow, but that's way more growth than that, even though that's so fat, because it's so much bigger around. That once these trees get big and old, they're rotting, they're dying, they're not storing carbon. It's not true. They store more carbon the older they get, and these trees, even once they die and fall, this tree right now has more live cells in it than it did when it was standing, because there's all these different things invading it, all these different forms of life, bacteria. It's storing an incredible amount of water for the forest around it. And so these trees, when they get old like this and they're so big and they fall, they actually are providing as much of an important ecosystem service as they were when they were standing up. Look at this thing, is that?
Like a mushroom.
Yeah, exactly. Look at all, come this way and you can see.
Find this, yeah, this has actually not even been on the ground that long. But some of these trees, depending on the conditions, they can take as long to rot as they took to grow.
Wow.
So they might be.
We've been surveying a lot of the clear cutting going on in the area, and I think just living in an urban area, you kind of become desensitized to the stark contrast between both clear cut areas and then areas that are hosts to a diverse array of vegetation. And that's the thing with the clear cut areas, is you don't get that because of the pesticides they throw on it and the genetically modified trees that they throw in there. That you're gonna have to cut this part out. But,
okay.
But
you're doing great.
You just you don't see the diversity, and you don't see the sheer size of these trees in the clear-cut areas, just due to the cycle in which they do it at it. You guys said it was every 30 to 40 years, as opposed to being 50 to 60 years, and it's you can see the effect it has on the environment.
Yeah,
Guys,
like you said.
I feel kind of like woken up about all this stuff because I travel a lot with my family, and you know, we go down these kind of rough roads that have trees all the way around, and then we see maybe like a burnt area or something that has been clear cutted, and we don't think about it. Like, we don't think about that someone is logging that and then maybe spraying it, and then it's just dying and causing so much erosion. Like, we just drive by and we're just like, oh, okay, that happened. It just happens, you know?
I didn't even know they were sprayed until today. I didn't know
Yeah.
that they were poisoned until just today.
Well, a lot of people don't. You know, in our campaign, that was our biggest push, was just educating people that it was even going on.
Mm-hmm. Personally, I would say that when I was younger, I would go through these forests all the time with my parents, and it was really great experience. You know, you get used to this kind of thick vegetation, the ferns around you, all the moss and everything, and then when you see the clear-cut areas, wow, those are just dead zones of nothing but Douglas firs, if they even grow back, and dead logs, and really just something that's ugly. You know, it's bad on the eyes. And now that talking to you even further, you know that that's not sustainable. You know, those areas are going to be left to rot, and they're not going to be anything for hundreds of years. They're just going to be pretty much broken down forests. They're not going to be anything needed in Oregon. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it's a really quick way to ruin what we already have. You know, as you said, this is 54 acres in the middle of hundreds and hundreds of acres of clear cut. That, you know, it's really disappointing to see that only 54 acres of all this around us, and then this big old tree we have here that you can't find in any clear cut area because they've been gone for 50 years now. To how bad it really has been.
It's really sad to, you know, think about it, because when there's clear cutting, it's interrupting the natural nutrient cycle and the growth cycle of a mature forest. You know, you're just interrupting that, starting over, and then maybe replanting them with other trees that might not necessarily have been meant to be there. You know, you're completely disrupting the whole system. And it's just crazy to think about that people are doing that to the earth that we're living on.
Yeah.
And supposed to be sustaining.
And then monocultures too. One disease that goes through it, and it's done. That whole place is going to be dead. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, in this area, there's so much diversity, even just species richness, that
I think
you survive fine.
one thing, just the aesthetic part of it, you immerse yourself in this environment, and it's a different feeling than seeing that landscape right there. That it's barren, and there's no vibrancy, there's no colors, there's no decaying, there's no life in a sense other than the life that they put there. And I don't think that's right.
That's something that's interesting too. We didn't see a single animal while we went to any of those clear cuts. We saw some crows and a couple eagles, but there was nothing on the ground. There was, you know, we've been here and saw little birds going around. I'm sure that there's much more in the underbrush, but absolutely zero animals in those clear-cut areas.
Even bugs kind of in those clear-cut areas, they seem to be very scarce.
Yeah.
You know, whereas here, you know, there's bugs everywhere, and that's part of the natural ecosystem of the forest.
Mm-hmm.
So we are students at Chemeketa studying in biology. Okay.
That was beautiful. That was
Cut.
Because we do.
You go.
We're 4 local Chemeketa students, or community college students from Chemeketa, and we're all native borns, and this is our first time coming out to the Valley of the Giants out here in Western Oregon. We spent the day going through and surveying most of the surrounding area, all the way from, where was it? Where did we come from? Moonshine Park. And we just got to see the vast difference in land between the chopped down kind of farmland for the Douglas firs compared to now the middle of the Valley of the Giants, where it's 54 acres of protected land full of diverse trees and ferns and kind of natural Oregon forest.
A little bit.
one thing about those clear cuts is that can't continue for too many cycles. So eventually that land's going to be useless for growing anything. And those corporations are just going to move to areas like this and turn this into the same thing. And we might just eventually run out of forest entirely if we allow that to continue.
That's actually a really good point, because like when you think about
We just got those nuggets.
You always got those nuggets.
when you think about maybe like animals overgrazing a land, or you know, if a really bad fire moves in and like another fire comes in the next year and the next year and the next year, you know, eventually that land's going to become sterile and nothing's going to be able to live there ever. So that's a really good point.
When you think about soil, you know, there's about 8 to 10 inches of topsoil that we have, right? And here's how we got the topsoil, is by thousands and thousands of years of salmon swimming up this river, spawning right here, the bear grabbing it, dragging it into the woods, you know, all these, you know, composting trees, and that's what creates soil. And what they're doing is a direct violation of soil, you know, all kinds of rights, you know, and for us, we were really into the rights of ecosystems and the rights of nature. So we feel like it's a direct violation of the rights of nature, what they're doing there.
Yeah. That should be something that should be brought up too, is the fact that they say that for every tree that they plant, that they're going to plant another tree back, but it's not the same. It's not going to ever produce the same kind of environment as this one here, because they're planting the exact same thing. It's just more Douglas fir. That it, you know, nutrient cycling is something that goes on in the soil. It's not going to provide the nutrients back into the soil that other plants would provide, and they're not planting the right plants. It's not going to live for nearly as long as any of this. It's not going to be around as long as these forests have been for thousands of years.
Great point. And I mean, when you think of soil mycelium, you know, basically the mycorrhizae and the mycelium are the communication network of the trees. And that's also how they pass nutrients around. And so when they come and cut, first that kills all the mycelium because they're all growing off the trees, and then they spray. So like to get that soil web and that biology in the soil back, you know, who knows?
Yeah.
Another really good point to think about is like,
Well, you got plenty of
here we
time.
go. So there's so many things in this world that are, you know, destroying our planet or going towards making it more unhealthy, so then we can't, you know, continue living on after a certain point. And trees and nature are what help try and reverse that, and what we're essentially doing is getting rid of the recycling. So we're essentially killing our planet even more than we already are.
Yeah, quicker.
Well, what pisses me off the most is that it's like Wall Street assholes, you know, basically trying to make 7% on their money instead of investing it in a bank. And so we're kind of caught in this industrial corporate cycle that's just like, you know, this rate of return, this growth, you know, and like we're kind of stuck in this perpetual cycle from them of cut, replant, you know, and it's, you know, this cycle that really leaves us to bear all the, you know, the brunt of it, you know, like this river's the water supply of Newport, Toledo, Siletz. I mean, all those clear cuts basically run right into our tap.
That should be said too, is that my father is very interested in the logging community. He's always said that they have been a backbone in Oregon for years. And learning today, they're really not putting as much as they're taking from this land back into it. They are, you know, as I've said, planting back in trees that aren't nearly as valuable as the ones they're taking away from us. They're not giving the amount of, they're half of a percentage, or half of a point of a percentage of the Oregon economy. And you know, we act like they're giving so much back to us. They're giving us jobs on top of jobs. Most of it's automated. It's not going to go back into the to the local economy whatsoever. So, you know, when you ask yourself, you know, why should we put in place these ecological laws? It's because you should preserve these kind of forests around us now, because those logging communities do not care about you or your local, pretty much town. It's going to be ruined, and what are you going to get out of it? Why are you protecting them? There's nothing that you're getting out of this. They're only taking from you, and they're getting huge amounts of money off of it. We've learned today that there's, what is it, a 20 yard cut or 20 feet cut away from rivers and streams. That's 20 feet away of poison, 20 feet away of down logs that are just going to be pushed down from winds and erosion of the surrounding land. It's it's asinine to think that protecting them gets you anything. So, I don't know, just focus on your local community and don't think about these large corporations that do not have your best interests in mind whatsoever. That's my spiel.
I think that's a good finishing note in
That's
my
like,
mind.
Anything else you guys want to add? I think that was great.
We're done with this.
I think you guys are great, and I think you guys have really, you've seen things, having this juxtaposition here of, a real old growth forest and what that looks like. And I mean, to think about an Indian, when they went from Newport to Corvallis, they basically walked through this for 100 miles. Right? And so I think, for us to be here and feel the trees and feel the energy of this forest is taking care of us. Right? We were out here and, one of the activists was like, we're here to protect you. And she could feel in her head, she's like, no, we're here to protect you. And this forest is here basically on the top of our watershed. This is guarding our watershed coming through, and you guys are the next generation that are going to have to help protect it as well. And I think it's interesting, like you said, being from the city, and how much of America doesn't understand what it's like to walk in these trees. They wouldn't invest in that timber organization or that Weyerhaeuser stock if they could really see what was going on out here.
well, also in like our everyday life, we go to jobs, we go to school, we take our cars and we go hang out with friends, but we're not thinking about what in the environment is happening.
Right.
We're not thinking about, people are logging that and it's just going away and the natural cycle of everything is just gone. Like, we don't think about that, but it's going to affect us someday and it's going to catch up. So,
Out of sight, out of mind.
yeah,
You don't see it every day, so why do you got to worry about it?
exactly.
It's true. Also, I hope my kids can go in some sort of forest like this, because it's only 54 acres now. Imagine what it's going to be in 20 years.
Well, hopefully, since it's federal forest, that it's going to stay protected.
Hopefully.
But I mean, with our
We're having to
current,
fight for that. The
with our
BLM is-
current state, our current administration and state, they're trying to get rid of even federal forest protections. But, I think you guys, that was awesome. It was really insightful.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to probably get back berries up here, just growing off the side of a tree 20 feet off the ground.
It's incredible.
It's insane, like, how nature can do that. Like,
Yeah.
there's no help in that. Like, we're not making that happen, but we're preventing it from happening.
You're turned on.
Ooh, it's dark right here.
So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this forest soil ecology. I think, seeing these roots here of these massive trees lets you really realize the beauty of this interconnection of our ecosystem, our soil, the air we breathe. We all have to think about how nature's interconnected and how without nature we can't survive. So Lincoln County Community Rights is working on building a movement that will create laws of nature for these ecosystems so that nature will actually have rights and legal standing in court. We feel like the idea that when you own something, the ability to clear cut it or do whatever you want with it just because you own property doesn't really take into respect the whole ecosystem or the community. Our communities are facing massive clear cutting of our watersheds, massive clear cutting. When we look at these ecosystems that are bringing in the water sources that we all drink for our kids, for our babies, we're filling our bottles out of these taps that are basically stuck from what comes from the soil. And when we start looking at these massive clear cuts and the soil erosion coming down from these sprayed areas into our water systems, we have to start wondering who's really benefiting from these clear cutting practices, who's really making out like a bandit, and who's paying the price. The people that are paying the price are the people here in our community. They're the people that end up at the local hospital, right? They're the people that end up with brain cancer, with birth defects from the spraying. There's so much history here in Lincoln County when we were the hot spot in 1978 for birth defects in the entire country. We have to start thinking about these neural tube birth defects and how that affects our population, how that affects our children. And when there's children born without brains in your community and the government doesn't do anything to stop it, then you realize that communities really have to take charge of their own laws. They have to create their own systems that make sure that their laws and their communities stand up for what's right. When we look at the soil and we look at how this interconnectivity of our whole ecosystem works, we realize that without this ecosystem, we can't survive. Boom, bam.
Miguel, you look
Okay, rolling.
What do you guys want to hear?
Colin, you should put your hands behind your back. Like
I think what you said before was really powerful, and just expand a little bit about remind me about it.
Reiterate it.
So corporations today are cutting vast amounts of area and only replanting one species at a time, and this can't continue for very long. After a few more cycles, they won't be able to plant anything here. And so they'll try to move into the protected areas, and they'll do the same thing to those lands. And we might not have much forest left after that.
Exactly what he said. Speaking the truth.
Nice.
What about your observation of the animals, and when you look at these areas out here and how they've been denuded of vegetation?
Many animals.
Having compared this area to the protected area, there is absolutely no wildlife pretty much anywhere.
Or insects.
No insects, not many birds that you can see. There's nowhere to nest, really, so why would there be birds out here? And as he was pointing out a minute ago, they're only planting Douglas fir. And in a naturally growing forest, there's going to be a whole, pretty much smorgasbord, that's a good word, of species of plant life out there. So if one sort of disease comes through that affects only Douglas firs, then this place is absolutely destroyed, and it's right back to a barren wasteland, like back over there. Also, it should be noted that this place gets poisoned, if you didn't know that. After a cutting, they poison. And that's something that was pretty eye-opening to me.
And you can tell that by the color of the ground.
Oh, it should be said too that right underneath this, where they put all the poison, is a river. So any sort of rain that comes through here washes that right down.
How do you feel coming from your biology class where you're learning about forestry and ecosystem management and seeing how the ecosystem out here is being treated? How does that make you feel about the current laws and situations with the laws here in Oregon?
They definitely need to be reformed. We shouldn't be planting only one species at a time. We should have several at the minimum.
We need nitrogen fixing plant life out here. We need a new curtail on the type of poisons that they can put on the plant life out here, because it's kind of ridiculous that there's so many different types of pesticides and herbicides that are being used in Oregon, the naturally supposed green state, but we have one of the most lax laws on poisons in the country. So it should kind of be revised if we're going to tote that we are so environmentally friendly.
Great. Perfect.
Miguel, you want to add something to anything? Give me one of your priceless nuggets.
What can I make a nugget about?
It is getting
The fact
better
that
with the
the-
sunset.
Our towns and cities get water from this river, and it's being poisoned by all of this. We can't be poisoning this area when we depend on this water.
True. And there's no health studies being done to see if there's any effects on the human that are consuming it, which is us. So it's kind of ridiculous that there's a lot, or what is it? I would say, I don't know, big lumber, if you want to put it into such simple terms, can go through and use untested herbicides and pesticides without even knowing the effects that it will have on the people surrounding, or the plant life, or the local species, local animal life. It's all very new, and there's just really no research being done on it. At least none that's being done that's not sponsored by Monsanto or lumber in general.
Weyerhaeuser.
Yeah, Weyerhaeuser, that's the name. What's the other one? Hansen?
Hancock.
Hancock. Weyerhaeuser and Hancock.
Monsanto works, they're all the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
The light is way better now.
Great job, you guys. I'm
Right.
up here in the Siletz Mountains. My name's Rio, and I'm coming to you guys talking a little bit about the way the ecosystem's been treating up here in the Siletz. And we've been traveling all day through an ecosystem that's been devastated by industrial logging. And I'm really worried about how it's affecting your watershed and the water you drink. We really have to think about, when we look at our taps, where our water comes from, right? A lot of people, when they're filling their babies' bottles, they look at this water, they think, oh, this is coming from the city water supply. Well, we've been looking at where our city's water supply comes from today. We've been documenting it over the years, and we realize that these giant clear cuts that are being aerial sprayed with pesticides like 2,4-D, which is an endocrine disruptor. So when your baby is drinking a chemical that's an endocrine disruptor, that means that it's actually changing the DNA of the person drinking this water. Why this affects us is that our populace as a whole is under this giant experiment conducted by chemical companies. For us here in Oregon, this comes in industrial agriculture based here in the woods. These giant clear cuts represent just a mere little portal into what this entire watershed looks like. And when the entire watershed's being cut, sprayed, and then systematically replanted with monoculture trees, basically we've created this giant ecosystem of GMO farming in our watershed. And when we start thinking about our watershed and how it's important to us in our community, the first thing we think about is health. And there's been so many proven studies about the detrimental effects of pesticides, especially to young fetus brains, young children, and the elderly. We really have to start thinking about our community in a way that makes us think about what's important in our community. Is it the people in our community? Is it the health of our community? Or is it these giant clear cuts that are bringing, what are we bringing? We're bringing money to these giant Wall Street firms that are using these as investment opportunities for investors in, say, Shanghai, New York. Do these people in New York City, do these people in Shanghai realize that their return on their investment is actually detrimental to the health of the communities around them? So Lincoln County Community Rights has come together to write an ordinance that basically banned aerial pesticide spraying here in Lincoln County. So instead of a helicopter spraying these clear cuts, they have to use manual means, because we feel like the way that pesticides are applied from the air, there's just too much risk to the environment, to the animals. We all live downstream. We have to think about how these things up in the mountains, how these things in the high country affect all of us in town. And If you live in Oregon, there's a 99% chance that you're getting your water from surface water. And there's 99% chance that those areas were being clear cut and being sprayed. So it's time for all of Oregonians to look up LincolnCountyCommunityRights.org. This is where you can find out about not only our ordinance, but also ways that we're working to improve the community. We're working on rights of nature laws. You know, this is groundbreaking stuff. We're going against 200 years of these judge-made laws, corporate personhood, Dillon's rule, right? These ideas that they box the community in so that there's nowhere to go when you try to make a stop to these things. And that's why these laws directly confront the whole entire system. Because it's not just the system of law, it's also the corporate government, how the states and the corporations collude together to make this corporate state. So when we make new laws, we think if the Supreme Court can make Citizens United, where it allows corporations to give unlimited amount of money to contributions to political advertising, why can't the people of their own community make laws to protect their health, safety, and welfare? And that's just what Lincoln County Community Rights has done. We wrote this law with help of lawyers from CELDIF, and we passed it here in our community. And we're really looking for other communities, other people to get involved. Like I said, I gave out our website address, but more importantly, look up the local people in your community that are working on watershed issues. What are they facing? They're facing a system of law that's been set up by corporations and corporate lawyers and Supreme Court justices that unfortunately are political. So why does the corporation have more rights than us in our community? Why does it, when we go to try to stop harm, we say, oh, well, you can't do that, that's illegal, you're going against 200 years of corporate-made law. The idea here is that it's time for the people to make their own law, for them to decide what they want in their community, because without that, how are we going to stop this? How are we going to stop climate change? How are we going to stop this bombardment of our bodies with chemicals just so they can save, oh, during the campaign they said, oh, it's going to cost them $60 more an acre to do this safely. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to stop us, and they couldn't. And that's why we all need to band together. We need to put our resources together, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's energy, and join us. Because without this fight, we can't stop this unjust, unrealistic law. I mean, this is your current state of law right here. This is it. This is what they do. This is just legal. And we don't think it should be legal. Because at this point, if this is legal, sustainability is illegal. How are we going to have a sustainable community if we can't actually protect our health and safety and welfare? So when the corporate lawyers came to sue Lincoln County after they passed their ordinance, right, saying that we were violating state law, we're saying no, we're just pushing against judge-made law, Supreme Court law, corporate personhood. Without challenging the entire system, there's no way to make any changes. And that's why Lincoln County Community Rights has pushed this law forward. That's why this lawsuit is going to be won by the people. And that's why, you know, the judge here in Lincoln County has got to decide on our behalf. Because if not, she's going to allow this to happen. She's going to allow all these things that are bombarding right into this beautiful Siletz River, this amazing salmon ecosystem that's thrived for millions of years. Without our help, she can't survive. And that's why I'm asking you to come to our website, LincolnCountyCommunityRights.org, reach out to us, become a member, donate. There's all kinds of things you can do to help out. You can sit at your home on your computer, you can help out from there, or you can come to our meetings. We meet on the phone twice a month, and in person once a month. You know, this is only 2 hours every week that you'd be donating to be part of our core group. Without a core group, we can't succeed. We pushed this measure against the largest PR firm owned by the chemical companies with 6 people. That's all it took, right? 6 people that dedicated all their time, all their energy to make this law pass. But without your help, we can't move forward. We can't protect this ecosystem. We can't make laws that make the rights of nature a law. Why does corporations have rights? Why are their rights supersede the rights of our community? because that's how they want it. That's how the system's set up. The system's been set up so that corporations can do whatever they want. And who does it regulate? It regulates us. It makes it so we can't make decisions in our own community. And making decisions in our own community, that's an inherent part of our body of government. It's we the people. So come find out more information about how you can make a difference.
It's got, there's any trees left. Those old stumps were there holding it together for hundreds of years. And now it just slides away.
Great job, you guys. You guys, I mean,
All right, this worked
that
out
was
so
a big day.
good. Thanks so much for coming out. I'm sure you probably ended up putting in a lot more time than other folks did on this volunteer project, I'm guessing.
Ours is going to be the best.
By far.
Well, and it's going to have a real impact on video footage and stuff like that. It's going to be useful to us for the next year or two and be incredibly significant for these campaigns. So it has a much bigger impact than how many specific trees each of you could have individually planted. Like stuff like this will literally feed into changing the